Hello, hello! So today I'm going to be guiding you to victory on Bloodhound, mainly focusing on his abilities, but also discussing some of the characters that he synergizes well with, and also some of the ways that you can counter him. Currently, Bloodhound is the only tracking character in the game, and he fulfills a very specific role for a team, to find where enemies are. If you're looking to find and kill as many enemies as possible in a match, there is no better option than Bloodhound. It also goes without saying, but it is absolutely essential that you are communicating with your team when using Bloodhound, because you can see things that they can't. His ultimate in particular requires you to communicate to get full value out of it, but we'll take a more detailed look into that in a little bit. I will be going through each ability very briefly for the sake of clarity, plus I always forget the ability names otherwise. But first of all, let's take a look at Bloodhound's passive Tracker, and how you should be using it. So this passive allows Bloodhound and Bloodhound alone to see tracks that are left behind by opponents for 60 seconds. The wiki lists all of these as things that can be seen with the passive, some noteworthy mentions being item and weapon pickups, doors opened, footsteps, and enemy abilities used. When you see tracks, the game shows you how old they are. It will display age and how many seconds ago the tracks were created. However, a quick way to work out how close an enemy is by looking at the colour. Older tracks will be grey, but the newer the track is, the redder it will be. Did you know that you can also get extra range on seeing tracked items by looking down your scope? If you look down your weapon scope, you will indeed be able to see tracks further away from you than if you're just looking around while running. This can be extremely useful if you're trying to work out which building an enemy has run into, but you can't find the next track anywhere normally. Considering the fact that you're the only player that can see these tracks, if you're playing solo, then it is absolutely imperative that you either use your mic to call out possible enemy locations, or you use the ping system to show your team that they've gone in X direction. I find it seems to help teammates the most if you ping your initial track findings and then a far away footprint track, so that then you've essentially ascertained the route that they took. Since it also shows you where enemies have vaulted, this can help you to work out whether they've gone onto the roof of your building, so even if they're trying to camp up there to get a cheeky kill, you can actually already be a step ahead of them. But again, make sure you're telling your team this. So due to this passive, Bloodhound will always work best at the front of a team, leading everyone to the next kill. That's why he'll always be a terrifying character in coordinated team play. If you're playing solo or duo, and you're not communicating these tracks to your team, you're essentially throwing and not using Bloodhound anywhere near close to his full potential. And obviously, due to the sheer aggressive nature of his kit, Bloodhound is a character that works much better in an aggressive playstyle than a defensive one. You won't get much value out of him if you spend the entire game avoiding enemy players, so it is important that you try to keep up with your Bloodhound players, let them lead the pack. So next up, we are moving on to Eye of the Allfather, Bloodhound's tactical ability. So this ability does a very similar job to his passive, and to be honest, over time I've grown to like this ability less and less. It's described as revealing enemies, traps and clues through buildings in front of you every 35 seconds. In front being the key words here. Of course, this ability is most often used if enemies are on the opposite side of walls to you, while you're in a fight. This shows where they were, and shows you if there's anything like a Caustic Trap over the wall. This ability actually reveals to your teammates also, meaning that they can also see the exact spot that an enemy was found. My main issue with Eye of the Allfather is the fact that if you use it during, or just before a fight breaks out, it actually obscures your vision massively. Not only this, but seeing where the enemies were standing sometimes is actually much worse than just listening to where they're running. The massive orange outlines can be extremely detrimental during fights as they practically obscure your vision. Not only this, but enemies can see exactly where you are when you use this ability. It sends out a bright pulse that shows through walls, so even though you might see the location of the enemies, they also know exactly where you are too. Also, a lot of players seem to think that Eye of the Allfather is a sort of circle around Bloodhound that reveals everything nearby, but this ain't quite the case. Remember, the description states that it reveals things in front of you. This means that actually, if you have a higher field of view in your settings selected, this ability gets a slight buff. However, it does not show enemies, traps that are behind you. It also will not reveal things that are on a higher or lower floor than you if they're slightly out of your field of view. So even if you've scanned a building, don't assume that you're completely safe. Lots of guides I saw on release recommended to use the ability off of cooldown, but I strongly disagree. The threat of enemies being able to see you through the walls is too risky to be using this ability all the time. Use your passive if you want to track people's locations. Use Eye of the Allfather if you already know they're super close to you and that they can probably hear you. The range is also pretty low. You'd need to be within approximately auto-shotty range as the crow flies to consistently scan enemies. Oh, and just because your allies can see it, don't use it as a cop-out just because you don't want to communicate where they are using your passive. Again, it's not worth the risk of enemies seeing your location a lot of the time, so choose your uses of this ability very wisely. Oh, but it is pretty good if you're trying to see through smokes and caustic gas though. And finally, we have Bloodhound's ultimate, Beast of the Hunt. So this ultimate can be absolutely insane sometimes since it gives you a massive boost to movement speed and highlights the location of all enemies on your screen for 35 seconds. This ultimate is used best from high ground locations because if, for example, you're sitting in the building at the top of bridges, you can see everything below you, and you can also see the tracks of anybody that's run into any buildings. Sometimes, using a balloon during ult is also pretty handy for finding players since you can see where they are and fly straight at them. Bloodhound's ult also hard counters Bangalore and Caustic since their smoke will have no effect if trying to obscure your vision. If anything, it kind of makes them easier to see. So this ultimate is probably the most aggressive ultimate in the game currently since the insane movement buff it gives allows you to close the distance between yourself and enemies in just a few seconds. There is no way a team can run away from you, so they will have no choice but to engage. Since you will be at the front of your team most of the time during this ult, do be aware that even though you might be Speedy Gonzalez running like crazy into the enemies, you don't really have any defensive capabilities, so you're going to be a hot target for the enemies. Skillful strafing techniques will make a Bloodhound extremely difficult to hit, so while I won't go in depth about the best strafing techniques here, just remember to change up the sides you're strafing to when running, and never just run in a straight line. If you're closing distance, then incorporate the slide and jump boost to make you tougher to hit while maintaining your momentum. There are also situations where you want to use Bloodhound ult to run away from a situation, although these are very few and far between, and normally are caused by you getting pincered by more than one squad. The movement speed can obviously help you get to your team faster and out of the center of a scuffle, but I'd only recommend running away for the first part of your ultimate just to go back and heal or shield up. The way to win games in Apex is to be aggressive and outplay your opponents. So even if the first half of your ult is used defensively, as long as your team is with you, there is no reason not to be able to go back in and re-engage the fight, considering you have knowledge and sights on everything that is happening around you. Bloodhound's ult synergizes well with all different weapon types since if you get a sniper like a Kraber for example, you can see anyone on the map in front of you trying to camp or whatever, and boom, they're dead before they can even see you. Shotguns and SMGs are obviously going to be insane at close range since you have an ult that allows you to run like Sonic the Hedgehog into them for 35 seconds. I would say though, that guns like the R99 and R301 that can one-clip opponents work insanely well with the move speed buff, and I mean, if you can see exactly where they are through smoke, then you're probably going to end up winning the duel more often than not, assuming you don't have potato aim. One side thing to note, however, is that due to the fact that the rest of the screen goes into black and white during ult, this makes seeing shield colours in particular almost impossible. Leave downed enemies for someone else to deal with, and focus on the target still up. But that leads into Bloodhound's counters, and who he synergizes well with. Even though Bloodhound hard counters Bangalore and Caustic since he can see through their smokes, this also means that he's actually pretty insane when paired up with them on his own team. I would say Bangalore is better than Caustic for this in most cases, since Caustic works better for holding down certain zones or buildings. Like, if you're the last two squads alive and you manage to make it into a building in the zone with a Caustic, then man, do these two characters absolutely decimate if you play it a little bit slower. Caustic sets up his traps and throws ult, Bloodhound ults or Eye of the Allfathers, and suddenly the enemy is trapped in a building and you can see exactly where they are. But most games don't end inside buildings, and you'll often want to engage enemies first in order to get priority over them. This is where Bangalore shines, because she can throw down her smoke on top of the enemies, meaning they can't really see anything, and then you can rush in with Bloodhound ultimate and penetrate their poor asses. You can also throw Bangalore ult behind the smoke to stop them from running away, which will trap them around the smoke in a lot of scenarios. Only trouble is, they could have digital threat scopes equipped, in which case you're basically even and the smoke doesn't benefit you that much. I also spoke in a Mirage guide about how Bloodhound is a good counter to Mirage since you can see the trails of his decoys when he throws them out. However, one thing to mention is that if you use Eye of the Allfather to scan Mirage decoys, it won't count them as hostiles, but it will appear as a regular orange outline, and could debate you, so keep that in mind. Caustic Traps are pretty oppressive against Bloodhound if you manage to somehow run into them without scanning them too. However, moving on to what I believe to be the biggest counter to Bloodhound, a Gibraltar with arc stars. Gibraltar's ultimate is incredibly useful for stopping Bloodhound from pushing in on a location. Bangalore's is sort of similar, but there's not quite as much of a threat since Bloodhounds can run straight through the ult before anything really happens. However, a Gibraltar ult thrown out of the side of a shield, for example, forces a Bloodhound to either 1, run towards the shield, or 2, run to a different location. Gibraltar's dome is insanely good for trying to stall out the duration of Bloodhound ult, and since Bloodhound benefits heavily from movement speed and sight, arc stars are painfully good against Bloodhound in particular. If you hit an arc star in his general area, he is going to be slowed and it will still screw with his sight for a short time. You either need to hard engage a Bloodhound with powerful ults like Gibraltar's, or you need to camp so hard with grenades that he gets completely zoned. Just don't rely on running away with a character like Pathfinder, because good Bloodhound players will find you, and you're just putting yourself at a disadvantage by running away and potentially getting shot in the back. So I think that's everything that I have for now. Do remember, the game has only been out for a few weeks and there's no doubt new advanced strats, techniques, and future characters, guns, whatever might change the way that Bloodhound is played. But these are the sorts of things I've been doing in my games, and I can get those fatty victory royales and solo games pretty often with it. If there are any tips you've also found that have helped you, then feel free to comment them below. The main purpose of this is to help as many Bloodhound players as we can get better at the game, so all advice is welcomed. But anyways, best of luck with teams, have fun dealing with Bloodhound, and hopefully I'll see you soon.